By the time Sunny reached the other side of the blossoming berth, Jet was already there, clad in her fitting black armor and leaning on her scythe. Her icy cold eyes peered at the long bridge connecting the wharf to the Eternal City, radiating a sense of deadly cold. Sunny appeared out of the shadows next to her, looking in the same direction. "Where are Neve, Ether, and Bloodwave?" She glanced at him briefly. "Guarding the ship. We stationed all available awakened throughout the interior, with masters spread out to defend the key areas. The Saints are protecting the surface decks. Ether is on the bridge. Neva's get full chapters from novelfire.net at the bow, while Bloodwave is on the stern. The three of them should be able to contend against anything that might get past us, or at least stall it long enough for you to arrive." Sunny nodded, burning a bit of his essence to substitute the lacking oxygen with it. "How is their breathing?" Jet smiled faintly. "They are fine while aboard the Night Garden. Beyond its aegis, they'll probably suffocate. However, these are Saints of Night we are talking about. They have memories to deal with the lack of breathing air in spades. So you don't have to worry about them." Sunny studied her for a moment. "What about you two?" Jet gave him a stare. "I am dead. What do I need air for?" Sunny coughed. Jet usually breathed like any normal human when she was not low on essence, at least, and her body metabolized oxygen like any other body would. However, it seemed that her special constitution gave her an alternative, just like Sunny's supreme rank did. There was enough oxygen in the air around them to speak normally, at least. That was a pleasant surprise. She raised an eyebrow. "So, what's the plan?" Sunny studied the bridge for a while, then pointed to a barely visible area of rippling air on the other side of it. "Do you see that? Let's take a look first, then decide what our next steps will be." Summoning the jade mantle, he reached into the shadows and pulled a black odachi out of it. Then, placing its blade on his shoulder, Sunny walked toward the Eternal City with confident steps. Jet followed. As they walked across the long bridge, black water reeled and raged below them, glistening with the reflections of the silver light. It was still eerily quiet and peaceful around them, though, with no movement whatsoever. Sunny had expected to be carving a path through a sea of abominations by now, but surprisingly enough, nothing had attacked them yet. His shadow sense also had no trouble enveloping everything around him, up to the end of the bridge, that was. There, his perception grew vague and muddied, as if something was suppressing it. "Strange." Sunny frowned. "What is that?" At some point, the smooth stone surface beneath their feet became uneven. Crouching, he wiped away droplets of water and studied it closely. Thin lines were carved into the bridge, following a strange pattern. After inspecting them for a while, Sunny raised an eyebrow. "A runic array?" Indeed, there were countless runes carved into the stone bridge, forming a complicated enchantment. Sunny was not as knowledgeable about runic sorcery as Cassie was, but he did know the basics. There was no need to test his modest mastery, though, since he could simply ask the master. "Cassie?" They continued on their way, observing the endless weave of mysterious runes. Eventually, Cassie saw enough to offer her opinion. "This is an auxiliary enchantment, way beyond what I could accomplish, but still only a small part of a larger array." Sunny tilted his head a little. "What does it do?" There was a long pause, and then Cassie's voice resounded in his mind. It was quiet and distorted, as if reaching him from a great distance, but still discernible. "It maintains the existence of these runes, as well as of the main enchantment that is situated somewhere else. Well, rather, it prevents the innate sorcery of the Eternal City from erasing the runes by restoring the surfaces they are carved into to a pristine condition." Sunny narrowed his eyes. "What does the main enchantment do, then?" Cassie's quiet, melodious laughter resounded in his head. "That I do not know. I would have to read it first, wouldn't I?" Sunny sighed. By then, they had almost reached the end of the bridge. Stopping, he remained motionless for a bit and then raised his head to study the anomaly they had noticed from the walls of the wharf. Jet let out a whistle. "I'll be damned." Sunny tended to agree. There, in front of them, a subtle rippling of the air betrayed the existence of an invisible barrier. There was another dome inside the aegis protecting the Eternal City, covering most of the city. It was very much like the shadow dome he had created to see if the night garden could submerge into the water, almost as vast as the primary one, but not quite, acting as a second layer of protection. Here, the foundation of the Eternal City was exposed, towering above the restless waters as dark cliffs. And on those cliffs, enormous runes were carved into the stone, extending in both directions as far as the eye could see. Almost as if they encircled the entire city. There was something quite familiar about how those runes were carved into the base of the Eternal City, as well. The way they looked was almost exactly the same as Darren's message on the Great Steel looked, only on a much larger scale. This is the main enchantment. I think I know what its purpose is. Sunny remained silent for a long while, looking at the rippling barrier of the secondary dome. He smiled darkly. I think I know, as well. Jet gave him a questioning look. Looking up at the endless mass of water looming over their heads, Sunny said, the first barrier is created by innate sorcery of the Eternal City, divine sorcery of the Demon of Repose. Its purpose is to keep things out. Then, he looked down at the great runes carved into the ancient stone. The second barrier is a complicated runic array much like the runic array that protected Twilight. It was created by the Serpent King. His expression darkened. And its purpose is to keep things in. Jed studied the wall of subtly rippling air in front of them and the pristine streets beyond it, then rested her scythe on her shoulders in a relaxed pose. Well, that explains why nothing has attacked us yet. She approached the barrier created by the Serpent King, stopping only a few centimeters away from it, then took a few steps along its nearly invisible surface. Seems like he was really wary of what hides inside this city, huh? Sunny shrugged. I guess. Jet remained silent for a few moments, then asked in a calm tone, more importantly, if this barrier prevents things from escaping the Eternal City, wouldn't we get trapped if we pass through it, as well? That was what Sunny was thinking about, too. He frowned. Nightwalker escaped it before, so there must be a way. Or maybe a condition sorting those who can leave, and those who can't. He sighed and shook his head. It does not matter, anyway. Anything that Dayron created, I can destroy. It might take some time, though, if we do need to destroy this barrier in order to escape, not to mention that I would not feel right getting rid of it before whatever he was wary of is dealt with, or at least contained in some way. Jet looked at him with dark amusement. Oh? What makes you so confident in your ability? Sunny simply shrugged. The fact that destroying something is always easier than creating it. Both Dayron and Sunny were supreme, and both were powerful sorcerers. So, with all other things being equal, he was confident in his ability to dismantle the runic array Dayron had created given time. Jet looked back at the invisible barrier. Guess we are going inside, then, Sunny grimaced. Well, yes. But first, we might want to, wait, what are you doing? Before he could even finish the sentence, Jet took a step forward and passed through the barrier. Then, she turned around and looked at him with a smile. What? Sunny stared at her, aghast. What do you mean, what? How could you just go and enter a mysterious magic barrier designed to trap living beings for all eternity? She shrugged. Didn't you say that you can easily destroy it? Sunny suppressed the impulse to grab his head. I say a lot of things. She laughed. That you do. She fell silent, studied the surrounding buildings for a few moments, then sighed and took a step back. Sunny tensed, but Jet seemed to pass through the barrier and return to the bridge with no issue. Still resting her arms on the shaft of the scythe, she rolled her shoulders and shook her head. My guess would be that the Serpent King was unwilling to let the immortals who had populated the Eternal City escape into the Twilight Sea. After all, there is no worse combination than immortality and corruption. So, this barrier probably prevents anything that died and was restored by the city from leaving its boundary. Sunny took a few deep breaths. What if your theory turned out to be wrong? Jet shrugged. Then I would have asked you to get me out. Better yet, I'd ask Neve to aim those scary cannons you so graciously crafted for me at the runes carved into the foundation of this place and blast a few dozen of them off the face of the earth. I am pretty sure that would have dealt with this runic array, too. Sunny sighed. I guess that works. With that, he walked past Jet and entered the barrier, too. As he passed it, an unpleasant feeling momentarily overwhelmed his senses. It was as if something cold and unfeeling was inspecting the depths of his being, searching for an unknown sign. Then, it brushed against Weaver's lineage and recoiled, retreating in fright. Sunny found himself standing near the mouth of a wide street. On both sides of him, ornate buildings rose into the darkness, with black water glistening with reflections of silver light as it rolled above him where the sky was supposed to be. The street was clean and empty, with beautiful sculptures lining the facades of the nearest buildings. Jet crossed the barrier for the second time and looked around. It doesn't seem so bad, actually. Sunny took a few steps forward, then frowned and looked at the entrance of one of the buildings. His shadow sense was still somewhat suppressed, but he could feel a presence there. Come out. There were a few seconds of silence, and then he heard the sound of light steps. A young man walked out of the buildings, walking toward them unhurriedly. At first glance, he was just barely past the age when one would become a sleeper, wearing a free tunic woven out of flowing, luxurious fabric. His features were soft and harmonious, beautiful enough to mistake him for a saint, and his glistening hair was held in place by an exquisitely decorated band of silver. He did not seem armed, and a faint smile was playing on his lips. Walking to the middle of the street, the beautiful youth stopped and turned, looking at them with a strange, curious expression. Jet quietly removed her scythe from her shoulders, grasping it tightly. Oh, hell. Sunny almost took a step back. Because when he peered into the soul of the striking young man, what met him was a vast ocean of vile, boundless darkness. The youth opened his mouth, as if wishing to welcome them to the eternal city. What escaped his mouth, however, were no words. Instead, it was an avalanche of grotesque, pulsating, hungry flesh. A dozen long tendrils ending with sharp spikes shot toward Sunny with such speed that he barely had time to react. Still, he managed to put his odachi in the path only to feel it shatter from the impact, not offering the fleshy tendrils any resistance. A split second later, the spikes were about to pierce his head. Sunny dissolved into shadows, leaving them whipping furiously through the air. The stone plates of the wide street exploded into a hurricane of sharp shards, and the nearest facade collapsed into a cloud of dust when one of the tendrils brushed against it in passing. Jet's scythe flashed, severing another. She moved with graceful ease, dodging the lethal attack by a hair's breadth. In the next moment, Sunny stepped from the shadows behind the monstrous youth and calmly beheaded him with the reformed blade of his odachi. Red blood spluttered on the stone rubble, and the corpse of the young man fell to his knees while his head rolled a few steps, dragging the limp tentacles behind it. Curses! Sunny watched as the headless corpse slowly toppled to the ground. Jet did not relax, glancing at him briefly. What's with that expression? He hesitated for a moment. It's because. There was no new shade in his soul. See. I don't think that thing is dead. Just as he said those words, the headless body stirred and floated into an upright position. Content originally comes from N0 Vel fired, net the grotesque tendrils protruding from the mouth of the severed head, meanwhile, twitched and moved, raising it a dozen meters above the ground like long, horrid legs. The youth's eyes peered at Sunny with the same innocent, mild curiosity. He shivered. Damnation. There were deadly beings out there, in the dreadful reaches of the ruthless and broken world, and then there was the Lord of Shadows, sunless sovereign of death. Among those who were just one step behind him, Soul Reaper Jet was perhaps the most lethal. She was definitely the most feared, and for a good reason. Few could survive her insidious aspect and deathly resolve. So, it was no exaggeration to say that when the two of them decided to fight side by side, there was hardly a more deadly duo than the Lord of Shadows and Soul Reaper. And yet, they failed to kill the eerie abomination that had welcomed them to the Eternal City. The battle was swift, but furious. Several blocks of the sunken city had been reduced to rubble as Sunny and Jet fought the monstrous youth, or, rather, the grotesque abomination that wore the exquisite face of a human youth. The ancient buildings toppled, and the stone canvas of the roads exploded into an avalanche of jagged shards. The silence of the empty streets was vanquished by the roaring clamor of a terrifying battle, and the beautiful landscape of the ancient city was replaced by a scene of total devastation. Curse it! Sunny dashed back, barely evading another fleshy tentacle. The breathtaking statue he had hidden behind was split in two, severed by the spike at the end of the tendril so cleanly that the cut seemed like no more than a thin crack for a few moments. This is a bit tough. Jet had spun her ghostly scythe, slicing several tendrils, then allowed the mist blade to assume the form of a graceful lucerne and used its long spike to pin the nearest severed tentacle to the cobblestones. It was just in time. Despite being separated from the main body of the abomination, the fleshy tentacles continued to move, trying to slither across the rubble toward her. What the hell do we do? Sunny cursed again. The eldritch horror was strong, about as strong as a great beast would be, making it a walking calamity. Even a supreme like him had to stay alert in a battle with this thing, so it was understandable that Jet was struggling. However, that was no reason for them to be having so much trouble dealing with the grotesque abomination. Sunny could slay a great beast in a heartbeat, and Jet was more than formidable enough to bridge the gap between the ranks. By all accounts, the eerie creature should have been dead by now. Find the newest release on novair.net, and in fact, they had already killed it many times. It was just that the grotesque abomination refused to stay dead. Sunny and Jet had cut, pierced, and crushed its body. They dealt fatal damage to its soul and poisoned it with the death will. The creature was burned to death and shattered after being frozen solid. But no matter what they did, the beautiful youth was restored to his original appearance before too long. Its crushed, severed, burned, shattered body returned to a flawless state, and then turned hideous and horrid once again as it swelled with malformed flesh and burst into a slithering forest of deadly tendrils. It did not take a wise man to realize what was happening. Damn, that damn demon. The fiend they were fighting was powerful, but in and of itself, it was not too terrifying. As evidence, Sunny and Jet were still unscathed despite battling it for several minutes already. The problem, however, was that it was immortal, or rather, that the eternal city made it immortal. The distinction was subtle, but important. The incredible, inexhaustible vitality that the monstrous youth possessed was not his own power. Rather, it was the manifestation of the sorcery that governed this cursed place, and so, killing him was not a matter of overpowering a great beast. It was a matter of overcoming the sorcery of a demon, and while Sunny had a high opinion of his prowess, that was not a feat that he could accomplish just yet. How did one fight an immortal abomination, then? Dodging another explosion of hungry flesh, Sunny could not help but smile darkly. No, but it's quite ironic, isn't it? Two dead warriors were trying to kill an undying monster. Brandishing his black odachi, he called out to Jet, "We can't kill it." His gaze landed on the shambling, appalling figure of the corrupted immortal. So, let's subdue it instead. He lunged forward, turning into a torrent of shadows to evade the whipping tendrils, and manifested into a corporeal form right in front of the abomination. His odachi flashed, severing the creature's arms the same time. A current of mist coalesced into a lithe figure behind the immortal, and Jet used her scythe to cut his legs. As the fiend fell to the ground, dozens of black chains burst from it and wrapped themselves around him. Individually, none of them were strong enough to bind him, but altogether, they held long enough for more chains to descend on the struggling form and bury it under the mass of inky black metal. Soon, there was nothing but a small hill of black links towering where the horrid youth once stood, trembling slightly like a macabre cocoon. Sunny stared at it somberly. A large swath of the eternal city around them was entirely decimated. But the ornate buildings were already restoring themselves, too. Shattered statues coalesced into their original, elegant forms. Toppled pillars rose from the rubble and assembled themselves. The rubble floated into the air and returned to its previous shape. The buildings grew from the devastated ruin like flowers, and the paving of the streets smoothed itself out. Before too long, Sunny and Jet found themselves standing on a beautiful plaza. Their surroundings were spotless and undamaged, with only the cocoon of black chains and their heavy breathing proving that the battle had happened. Jet stared at the small hill of chains and then looked at Sunny with a somber expression. "Hey." He raised an eyebrow. "What?" She pointed to the black cocoon with the blade of her war scythe. "That was just one of them, right?" Sunny nodded slowly, prompting her to give him a dark smile. "And you said that there were thousands, or maybe even millions of these things within the city?" He hesitated for a few moments, suppressing a shiver. What could he say? Sunny sighed. "Sounds about right." As the person who had invited Jet to this nightmarish place, he was starting to feel a tiny bit guilty. Sunny did not want to admit it, but he was troubled. The battle had been intense, and the enemy was powerful, but that was not the reason for his unease. The fact that the nightmare creature had turned out to be immortal wasn't either. Even the knowledge that there was a vast horde of these undying fiends populating the Eternal City was not the reason why he felt so somber. No. The real reason why Sunny was troubled was that he could not make sense of the monstrous youth. There was something quite strange about this nightmare creature, to the point that he was not even sure if he was correct to call it one. First, Sunny did not see what he usually saw when peering into the souls of abominations. There was the vile darkness of corruption, true, but it did not possess the usual nodes that served as sources of the spreading, tumorous infection. So, he could not even guess the class of the creature, only tell that it was roughly of the great rank. Second, even Cassie could not tell what the monstrous fiend was. All she could say after peering at its essence was a few cryptic words: "It is, like a part of a greater whole hiding inside an usurped vessel." Then, after falling silent for a while, she added in a hesitant tone, "But the greater whole it is a part of is itself incomplete, longing to be mended." The fact that Cassie's dormant ability could not draw knowledge about the eldritch horror was already a cause for concern. Her words describing what little she did glimpse were even more worrisome. A part of a greater whole, usurped vessel, incomplete. What the hell did it mean? And what the hell was the corrupted immortal, really? Sunny sighed. The cocoon of black chains continued to stir subtly, since the horrid fiend was still struggling to break free. Sunny could keep it bound without too much trouble, but he could only do so by maintaining the manifested shadows personally. Making the chains permanent would weaken them, which would allow the monstrous youth to escape. Which meant that while he could contain this particular abomination or maybe even 1,000 of them, he could not contain them all. He could not even contain most of them, which was a problem. He grimaced and looked at the black underside of the rolling sea above them, with silver light reflecting from its restless surface. Suddenly, it occurred to him that this was a kind of black sky, as well. This is going to be quite a spectacle. Jet wore a somber expression, her icy gaze hiding a hint of some dark emotion. She lingered for a while, looked at her scythe briefly, and then said in a neutral tone, "We can still retreat, you know." Sunny slowly shook his head. "No. There's nowhere to retreat." He looked away from the pile of black chains and turned to her. "It might seem like we can escape to safer waters, but that is an illusion. There is nowhere safe in this world, in two worlds, even. Anywhere and everywhere can and will tum into a worse hell. All of existence is a war zone, so if we can't deal even with this much, then what's the point of seeking safety somewhere else?" Jet let out a hollow chuckle. "This much is a city full of immortal great ones, though. With an army of wraiths added as a free bonus. So what are we going to do?" Sunny studied her for a while, then smiled darkly. "For now, I suggest you take a few steps back." Jet frowned. "Why? What are you going to do?" Sunny looked around, noting that he could not see the wharf from behind the tall buildings. "Let me show you. This should be far enough, I think." Saying that, he reached into his soul and summoned something. Not long before that, Aiko made her way to the throne room of the Dark Castle, carrying the latest report. Her boss was lounging on his throne, as usual, looking into the distance with an amused expression. She yawned, then belatedly covered her mouth with her dainty hand. At the moment, Aiko really missed her opulent bedroom on the highest floor of the castle. "Hey, boss. About our investigation into the strange trends on the black market." He waved his hand lazily, interrupting her, and then looked at her with a sly smile. "Oh." Suddenly, Aiko had a very, very bad feeling. Sunny seemed inordinately happy. Why was he so happy? "Hey, Aiko. Let me ask you a question. How would you go about conquering a city full of immortal nightmare creatures?" She frowned. "I wouldn't. I'd tum around and run away. No, actually, I would never end up anywhere near such a terrifying place, to begin with. Only a complete, irremediable idiot would." "No, really." Her boss blinked a few times with an offended expression on his pale face. "Hey. That's harsh." Aiko suppressed the desire to palm her face. "Wait, that was not a hypothetical question? Where the hell did you find a city full of immortal abominations? And why? Why would you do something like that?" Sunny raised his chin. "No, it wasn't. Under the sea. And, why? Because there's treasure involved." Aiko was about to say more, but froze instead. A moment later, her eyes glistened. Her expression changed subtly. "Treasure? Huh. What kind of?" But her boss shook his head. "Nope. Since you're apparently full of prejudice against immortal abominations, I am not taking you with me. Not a chance. Don't even ask." She just stared at him for a moment. "I wasn't going to, though?" Her boss nodded. "Great. Then, if you really don't want to go, I suggest you vacate the premises. Fast." Aiko stared at him in confusion. At that moment, something eerie happened. 3 more versions of Sunny appeared from the shadows behind her, walking toward the throne. "And I mean really fast. Immediately would be best. You can set up a temporary office in the Nameless Temple. There's a cot in the inner sanctum, I think? Oh, and don't forget to water my tree. This is bad." The various incarnations of her boss very rarely gathered in one place. And every time they did, something terrible happened. "Oh, no." Not wasting any time, Aiko dashed forward, sprinted past the throne, and jumped out of the window. As she hovered in the lightless sky of the forgotten shore, looking down at the magnificent edifice of the dark castle, the castle suddenly vanished without a trace. "Oh, no. My bedroom." And just a few moments later, it appeared again somewhere else. To be precise, it appeared on an empty, pristine plaza in the Eternal City. This chapter is updated by NovelFire.net. Jet had barely managed to take a few steps back before the black spires of the dark castle suddenly rose from the shadows enveloping the square. Soon enough, a magnificent black fortress appeared out of nowhere between the ornate buildings, casting a deep shadow upon them. Then, its gates opened with a chilling groan. And out of the darkness inside, a vast legion of silent shades marched onto the ancient streets. Sunny pulled Jet into the shadows, bringing them both to stand on the tall walls of the dark castle. Below them, an endless river of darkness was flowing out of its gates, slowly consuming the wide-open expanse of the magnificent plaza. That was his shadow legion, every shade he had collected over the years, except for a few left to guard his citadel in the burned forest and the sacred shades he could not summon on a whim. Men and nightmare creatures, united in the tranquil embrace of his deathly authority, those who came from the forgotten shore, the chained isles, from the cold reaches of Antarctica, the endless tides of the great river, the sweltering heat of Godgrave, the ash and cinders of the burned forest, and many places beyond those. All of them had come to the Eternal City now, assembling into a vast battle formation in utter silence, hundreds of thousands of dead warriors, all ready to wage war on the immortal swarm. Some flooded the plaza below, some manned the walls of the dark castle. The castle itself trembled as it stirred, casting a hungry gaze at the beautiful streets beyond. NW novel chapters are published on NovelFire.net, but that was not all. From the shadows to Sunny's left, Saint rose in the fearsome glory of her black armor. From the shadows to his right, Slayer appeared like a ghost. Far below, a towering figure forged from blackened steel and infernal flames stepped from the castle gates, the silver light of the distant spires reflecting dimly from the numerous jagged blades that littered its impenetrable carapace. A gargantuan serpent with onyx scales wrapped itself around one of the towers of the dark castle, letting out a chilling hiss that washed over the world as the war horn of death. A tenebrous steed with flames burning in its crimson eyes ascended the wall to stand beside its master, the ringing of its adamantine hooves echoing across the vast plaza. And, finally, the shadows stirred and rose, coalescing into 4 dark figures. When they appeared, the light of the silver spires seemed to dim, and the abyssal darkness pressing down on the eternal city seemed to grow even darker. A cold wind blew across the plaza, bringing with it the promise of murder and death. Those 4 had the same face as Sunny, each wielding the power of a supreme being. That was the Lord of Shadows and his legion, an insidious and indestructible force capable of washing over entire realms and reducing them to rubble. Now, that force had invaded the sunken city of the Demon of Repose. Standing by his side, Jet sighed quietly. Wow. She remained motionless for a few moments, observing the plaza. Where there had been only emptiness minutes ago now stood a fearsome castle. Beyond its walls, a vast army of silent shadows was ready for battle. The very atmosphere of the Eternal City had changed, announcing the arrival of a new, terrifying invader. Jet studied Sunny carefully, then shook her head. So this is the power of a sovereign. She had witnessed Nephi's descend into battle, but not the sovereign of death. Beholding his supreme power felt different, though perhaps because the visible manifestation of changing stars' power, despite its unimaginable destructiveness, was personal in nature. This, however, illustrated the essence of what a sovereign was far more demonstrably. A being who wielded authority as a weapon, whose influence spread over the world and subjugated multitudes. A ruler. It was strange to think that she was acquainted with a creature like that. Sunny gave her a confused look. Oh, right. You haven't really seen me get serious, have you? In Jet's defense, no one had really seen the Lord of Shadow wield his supreme power. The Shadow Legion had mostly been confined to the burned forest ever since Sunny became a sovereign, and he was the only human there. Cassie must have witnessed how tyrannical his domain was, but mostly, people had only glimpsed it during that last, fateful battle in Godgrave. Sunny had just barely attained supremacy back then, though, so it hardly counted as a conscious expression of his true strength. Jet shook her head again. No. And, how do I put it, strangely enough, you don't give an impression of someone who wields this kind of terrifying power. To be honest, it is hard to remember that you are a sovereign when you're around. Sunny grinned. Really? Why, thank you. That is by design. Jet raised an eyebrow, prompting him to shrug. Nobody said that a sovereign has to emanate a solemn and unapproachable aura of suffocating dominance, you know? All that zeal and worship Nephis is subjected to, ugh, I find it weird. No, thank you. There's a more practical reason why I prefer to act as a fun and easygoing demigod, as well. It was because he could not allow anyone to worship him, since doing so would bring the forgotten god closer to awakening. Sunny sighed. Oh, and by the way, there is a reason why I summoned my castle and my army now, and it's not just to make an awesome entrance. Jet smiled faintly. Let me guess, it's because thousands of these corrupted immortals are already rushing at us. Sunny was surprised. How did you know? She looked at the Shadow Legion. Because that is a defensive formation, and the shadows on the walls of the castle are all taking positions as if expecting a siege. Sunny remained silent for a few moments, then grimaced. You are right. I can't sense our surroundings very well, but I do feel them approaching more or less every abomination that has been dwelling on this particular island of the Eternal City. The first ones will arrive in under a minute, I'd say. He glanced down at the cocoon of black chains, which was contained in the courtyard of the dark castle now. So, we have around a minute to decide how to win a battle against these things. Looking at the vast army of silent shades arrayed on the plaza below them, Sunny inhaled deeply. There wasn't much time for them to assess the situation and prepare for battle, but then again, this particular battle was merely the prelude for the frightening war that would swallow the Eternal City soon. He exhaled. Actually, I am not too concerned about this first skirmish. You should probably understand why. Jet was an experienced commander, after all. In fact, she was far more experienced than he was, in that regard. She had already been a high-ranking officer during the Southern Campaign, having commanded various government forces throughout her storied career. Taking charge of the entire First Irregular Company was merely the next step. Later, Sunny had mostly faced the perils of the Dream Realm on his own, while Jet's responsibilities grew exponentially. He did take charge of a contingent of the Sword Army in Godgrave, but that paled in comparison to her leadership experience, both civil and military. There was little difference between the two in the Age of Nightmares, anyway. So, he could hardly find a better advisor. She nodded. The Eternal City is vast, and it is separated into islands by the powerful currents of water. We have just arrived, so, the nightmare creatures we will face are merely those of them who happened to be on this particular island when we landed. Her expression darkened. The other inhabitants of the Eternal City would have already sensed our presence, though. Even if they have not, the clamor of this battle will reveal our location to them. So, we will be beset by countless times more enemies before too long, and they will come at us from various directions, threatening to outflank our forces or bypass them entirely to reach the Night Garden. Sunny smiled faintly. So, what do you recommend we do? Jet fell silent for a few seconds, contemplating. Then, she said in a somber tone, the situation is unusual, because apart from the current rulers of the city, there is not one, but two invading forces. The terrain is difficult, as well, so, although I would have suggested that we entrench ourselves and let the enemy crush themselves into pulp against our defenses, that is not an option now. She glanced into the distance, calculating. We will need to advance, conquer territory, and play a strategic game of cat and mouse with these creepy immortals. Most importantly, we will need to keep advancing at a sufficient rate and achieve a swift victory. There are two possible outcomes if we don't, and neither of them promises a good ending for us. Sunny's smile turned a little dark. He nodded. Indeed. If the Dutchman is wiped out, the immortals who are currently tied up fighting against the Wraith army will all descend upon us, doubling the already overwhelming strength of our enemies. If it is the opposite and the Wraiths conquer the city, though, gods, who knows what terrible fate will befall us? They will get to all the treasures we are aiming for first, at the very least. And something tells me that they'll also grow stronger as a result. He looked in the direction where a towering lighthouse was shining with radiant light, far in the distance, and sighed. So, this harrowing race seems to be far from over. We are still running against the clock. It was in more senses than one, as well. Sunny and Jet had only discussed the situation briefly, but the time afforded to them was already almost over. These are issues of strategy, though. Saying those words, Jet gave him an evaluating look. What we need to discuss first is tactics. How do we even battle something that cannot be killed? That was the issue, indeed. Sunny glanced down at the black cocoon of shadow chains. He remained silent for a few moments, then said evenly, actually, my shades cannot be killed, either. Not through usual means, at least even if they are destroyed, they will eventually come back. It is just that they need some time to mend themselves. The immortals of the Eternal City take time to be revived, as well, although it seems much shorter. His expression darkened. In that short moment between destruction and restoration, though, they are vulnerable. That is when we can contain them. As long as we come up with a reliable manner of containment, that is. So. At the end, it all comes down to simple math. We need to disable them faster than they vanquish my shades. Sensing movement near the entrances to the plaza, Sunny sighed. Which means that there would be no decisive victory or defeat in this conflict. Instead, it's going to be a war of attrition. What we must do is leverage our advantages and employ strategies to maximize the enemy losses while minimizing our own. Then, we will be able to conquer the Eternal City instead of being devoured by it. Jet flexed, stretching her shoulders, and gave him an amused smile. That was my conclusion, as well. As for the details. She glanced at the far side of the plaza, where a wide road and myriad smaller alleys opened into it from the depths of the city. Well, I guess we will have to iron them out as we go. Her tone turned a little somber because there, in the distance, a small silhouette appeared at the mouth of a dark alley. Then, there was another, and another, and another. Follow current novels on novifire.net. Soon enough, a crowd had gathered at the edge of the plaza as if the citizens of the Eternal City had to come to peruse the goods of an open-air market. All of them were young and breathtakingly beautiful, wearing light and elegant garments, their smooth faces and glistening eyes betraying no sign of the hidden corruption. None of them was armed, either. And yet, their placid, curious glances made Sunny shiver. He took a deep breath and then gazed at the distant immortals chillingly. Let's do that, then. The devil hides in the details, after all.